Welcome to the Morning Roundup. I'm really glad you're joining us today because, well, we have an incredible deep dive lined up for you.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of sources today. It's pretty intense.
Intense is the word.
Right.
I mean, imagine two completely different 13-year-old kids. They're both logging onto a computer at like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right, happening every night.
Exactly. So the first kid is, upper middle class. He's looking at college prep materials, completely unaware that his whole future is already being mapped out by this rigged algorithmic system, a system designed to basically manage his quiet decline.
And then you have the second kid.
Right. The second kid is sitting in some cramped apartment. He's logging into a public server on Grand Theft Auto Online. And right there, a cartel recruiter is literally analyzing his gameplay, getting ready to offer him a highly structured, heavily mentored job in a global crime syndicate.
It's just a terrifying juxtaposition.
It really is. One system is just abandoning its youth to the void, and the other is treating this digital landscape like a frontier, just actively harvesting marginalized kids.
And that right there, that perfectly encapsulates the whole tectonic shift we're looking at today. The theme of today's deep dive is the void and the frontier.
The void and the frontier. I like that.
Yeah, because we are watching the total collapse of these legacy institutions that define the 20th century, right? The university, the state, the traditional church.
They're all crumbling.
They are, but, nature abhors a vacuum. So where an institution collapses, you get this void. And stepping right into that void is this wild, totally unregulated digital frontier.
Populated by opportunists.
Opportunists, religious zealots, criminal empires, and they're all fiercely competing to rewire how we define identity and reality.
Right. So today, we're exploring how everyone, from unemployed college grads to political strategists, is trying to navigate this chaos. And hey, true to our style here at the Morning Roundup, we are skipping the endless disclaimers today.
No hand-wringing.
Exactly. We're just going to present the raw information from the sources, make the connections, maybe push your buttons a bit, and let you decide how to respond to it.
Which is exactly what we need to do. Because you really can't understand this new frontier without dissecting why the old institutions collapsed in the first place.
Right. We got to start at the root.
Yeah. And the most visceral example of that collapse in our sources today comes straight from the American university system.
Oh, man, the urgently firing channel source. This one blew my mind.
It's brutal.
It really is. Let's look at their breakdown of the college career pipeline. We're looking at some staggering math right now. Basically, 2.1 million young adults are graduating right about now.
2 million. Just entering the market.
Yeah, but according to the data, 900,000 of them are walking straight into underemployment.
Wow.
And over 100,000 are going to be completely unemployed. The launchpad is just, well, it's exploded on the launchpad.
It really has. But, what's fascinating is the source points out this isn't just an accident. It's the deliberate structural defunding of the very mechanisms that used to connect students to the economy.
Explain that. Because universities still have career centers, right?
They do, but the underlying logic is totally changed. Historically, higher education was this sorting mechanism. You didn't just pay for the piece of paper.
Right, you paid for the network.
Exactly. You paid for the localized social capital. You paid for a career specialist who personally knew the hiring managers at, like, Lockheed Martin or Goldman Sachs.
They could literally pick up a phone and vouch for you.
Exactly. But the source points out this radical shift that really kicked into high gear around 2020. Universities just started actively liquidating that human infrastructure.
The numbers they gave were insane. They looked at Utah State University, right?
Yeah, Utah State.
And they watched the salaries for career specialists get slashed. It went from around $70,000 down to $47,000 over a decade. Who can live on that?
Almost no professional in that field. And the source actually ended up as the sole career specialist there, responsible for 2,000 engineering students.
2,000. I mean, think about the pure physics of human relationships there. You cannot build a genuine, individualized network when your caseload is 2,000 humans.
No, it's not mentorship at that point. It's just crowd control.
Crowd control. That's exactly it. So what happens? The university still has to pretend it offers career placement.
Right. So they outsource the mentorship to the digital void. They pivot to technology.
Bots.
Yeah, platforms like Handshake, Parker Dewey, AI resume scanners. They completely replace a human advocate who, understands a student's actual potential with an algorithmic filter.
A filter that just reduces 4 years of your life to a couple of keywords.
Exactly.
I mean, let's theorize on the psychology of that for a second.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the shoes of a 22-year-old student. You've just spent 4 years, tens of thousands of dollars, supposedly developing into a well-rounded human. And at the end, the university essentially pats you on the back and says, "Great job, now go fight the bot."
Just threw them to the wolves.
Literally. You're fighting applicant tracking systems, competing against thousands of invisible strangers. And it's not even a fair fight. The source notes that roughly 40% of current job listings are totally fake.
Ah, the ghost jobs.
Yeah, ghost jobs. Companies just post listings to project growth to their shareholders or to keep their burned-out employees from quitting by pretending help is on the way.
It's incredibly cynical.
It is. Imagine the psychological toll of sending hundreds of resumes into a literal void. It has to be devastating.
Well, it breeds profound nihilism. And what makes it a genuine betrayal, according to the source, is the contrast with the elite institutions. Because the Ivy Leagues, they are not doing this.
Oh, of course not.
No, they deeply understand the value of the hidden job market.
The back channel stuff.
Yeah, the referrals, the unlisted internships, the quiet pipelines to Wall Street. Elite schools are spending, get this, between $110,000 to $160,000 per specialist.
Oh.
And they maintain a strict ratio, one specialist for every 300 students.
So they are buying actual human advocacy for their kids.
Exactly. While the average public university feeds its students to the algorithm.
Now, this is where the math just completely breaks my brain.
Yeah.
Because I hear that and think, well, maybe average universities are just broke.
Right. That's the common excuse.
But the source ran the numbers. To fix this, to bring an average public university of 10,000 students up to a functional elite-level standard, it would cost about $5 million a year.
$5 million.
Right, which sounds like a lot. But the average annual operating budget for a typical 4-year university is around $1.5 billion.
It's astronomical.
So $5 million is what, 0.33% of their budget? It's literally a rounding error. If they can fix their core promise for pocket change, why aren't they doing it?
The source argues it comes down to a total lack of accountability at the administrative level. You have provosts pulling in $500,000 a year, and they are simply not incentivized by post-graduation employment rates.
Because the accreditation boards don't penalize them.
Exactly. And the faculty senates, they're driven by internal academic politics. They actively resist giving non-academic staff, like career advisors, the authority to disrupt class schedules for things like career fairs.
So the internal politics have completely detached from the students' actual needs. The university is basically stripping away their unique human context, ignoring who they are, and flattening them into data points to be managed at scale.
Flattened into data points, yes. And that transitions perfectly into the NXR Studios and Dale Partridge source.
Right, the cultural erasure argument.
Yeah, because they argue that this exact dynamic, this flattening of the human being into a manageable unit, isn't just a university problem. They claim it is the defining characteristic of the entire modern Western world.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is a huge claim. They introduced this historical framework they call the post-war consensus.
Yes, the PWC. And just to be clear for the listeners, we are simply unpacking the mechanics of their argument here as presented.
Right, no endorsements, just the raw framework.
So their core thesis is that over the last century and a half, there's been this massive, deliberate cultural movement aimed at erasing all foundational human distinctions.
Meaning what?
Meaning race, sex, national identity, religion. The supposed goal was to avoid conflict. If we just erase all the borders and categories that divide us, we achieve perpetual peace.
The ultimate utopian vision.
Right. But the source argues this project has radically failed. Instead of peace, it resulted in an isolating, hyper-individualistic void.
And they trace this back to what they call the four foundations. I found this part fascinating because they pull from totally different domains of history.
Yeah, they really weave it together. The first foundation they identify is actually the 14th Amendment.
The 14th Amendment. Okay, explain their logic there.
Yeah. The argument is that by establishing birthright citizenship after the Civil War, the U.S. fundamentally shifted away from earlier, more European-centric legal definitions of citizenship.
So they see it as the legal beginning of erasing racial and ethnic distinctions at the state level.
Exactly. Then they point to the second foundation, first wave feminism.
Specifically, they focus on the dismantling of coverture, right?
Yes, the legal doctrine of coverture. Under that old system, a married couple was treated as a single, unified legal entity.
Right.
The source argues that by dissolving coverture, feminism didn't just give women the vote, it fundamentally altered the basic building block of society. It replaced the family unit with the autonomous individual.
Making the individual the primary economic and legal actor.
Right, which they argue began the erasure of sexual distinctions and traditional biblical marriage.
Wow, okay. Then they move to foreign policy for the third foundation. They call it Wilsonian American supremacy.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson. The claim here is that Wilson fundamentally altered American identity. Instead of being a distinct sovereign republic that just cared about its own borders, America was reframed as a global democratic empire.
Policing the globe.
Right, exporting an ideology. And the source argues that inherently erases the traditional concept of a bordered nation state.
And the fourth foundation?
The fourth one they present is the influence of Jewish involvement in early 20th century politics, finance, and media.
Okay, and how does the source connect that to the Erasure Project?
They argue that this influence drove a systematic elimination of distinct religious boundaries in the public square. They claim it culminated in the creation of what they call the hyphenated heresy of Judeo-Christianity.
Meaning it was a deliberate move to dilute the specifically Christian cultural hegemony of the nation into a broader, less defined moralism.
Exactly. So those are the four foundations that supposedly primed the culture.
And then, according to the source, things went into overdrive after 1945. They list 4 drivers that accelerated this entire erasure project.
Right. Driver number 1, collective guilt.
World War II.
Yeah, the sheer trauma of the war, the horrors of the Holocaust. The source argues it resulted in the West pathologizing its own history. European roots, nationalism, Western heritage. Suddenly they were all viewed as inherently dangerous.
So multiculturalism becomes not just a policy, but a mechanism of psychological repentance.
Precisely. And that ties right into their second driver, cultural Marxism.
Okay, the Frankfurt School stuff.
Right. When classical economic Marxism failed to trigger working-class revolutions in the West, the intellectuals shifted the battlefield. They kept the oppressor versus oppressed dynamic, but transposed it onto culture.
So they reframed gender, religion, and race as artificial categories of oppression.
Yes. And by dismantling those distinctions, they sought to dismantle the old societal order entirely.
So the intellectuals are attacking from the left. But then the source says the third driver actually comes from the corporate right, economic globalism.
The capitalist machine. It demanded constant growth, which meant finding cheaper labor and new markets.
And the source's argument is that globalism requires a homogenized world. You can't have deeply rooted, distinct local cultures if you want everyone to consume the exact same mass-produced junk.
Right. They need interchangeable labor units. It pushed America to prioritize the international economic empire over the sovereign citizen.
Which brings us perfectly to their final driver, boomer consumerism and entitlement.
The post-war generation. The source paints them as the first cohort to be entirely captured by mass corporate marketing.
Taught from childhood that the ultimate goal is just self-actualization.
Exactly. In this framework, the boomers willingly sacrificed the heavier realities of community, tradition, and family obligations on the altar of personal convenience.
And consumer identity. It's an incredibly dense framework. But looking at it objectively, without taking a side, you can clearly see the mechanism they're describing. It's the systematic removal of context.
A removal of context, yes.
You strip a person of their local roots, their ancestral religion, define gender roles, national sovereignty.
Yeah.
What are you left with?
You're left with the exact same thing the university created.
A completely isolated, autonomous data point floating in a digital marketplace.
Yeah.
You've created a void where meaning used to be.
And here is the brutal reality of human sociology, right?
Yeah.
Voids do not stay empty.
Never.
If the university, the state, the culture refuse to provide a young person with a coherent identity or a tribe, predatory systems will immediately rush in to provide those exact things.
Which brings us to the most chilling source in the stack today, the Basecamp report on the digital underworld.
It is terrifying.
Truly. We are seeing cartels and terrorist networks basically adopting the gig economy model to fill this exact societal void.
Let's look closely at the mechanism of this remote-controlled crime. The source details an Iraqi crime syndicate currently operating in Melbourne, Australia.
Okay.
The masterminds, figures like Kazam Mohammed, they aren't even in Australia. They are allegedly running operations from Baghdad.
Running it entirely remotely.
Yeah. And they enforce a CIS tax, which is just a pure extortion racket targeting tobacco shops and nightclubs.
And if the owner refuses to pay the digital demand.
Their business is physically firebombed.
But the innovation here, the terrifying part, is the labor force they are using to execute these bombings.
They aren't using hardened mob enforcers.
No. They are recruiting children, 11 to 14-year-old kids.
It's unbelievable.
I read that and literally had to stop and reread it. The syndicate is coordinating targeted arson through encrypted apps like Signal and WhatsApp, paying children to throw Molotov cocktails.
And you have to ask, why children? Why risk your criminal empire on the unreliability of a middle schooler?
Exactly why.
Because it is a flawlessly cynical legal arbitrage.
Legal arbitrage.
Yes. The syndicate leaders understand the Western judicial system better than most citizens do. They know that a minor, particularly an 11 or 12-year-old, possesses minimal juvenile liability.
Oh, wow.
If an adult cartel member firebombs a building, they face decades in maximum security. If a 13-year-old does it, the system treats them as a victim of circumstance.
They might see a few years in a youth rehabilitation center, maybe get their records sealed.
Exactly. From the syndicate's perspective, these kids are an incredibly cheap, highly motivated, and entirely disposable weapon.
The legal loophole makes sense in a really sick way. But the logistics of recruitment, that is what truly exposes the societal void we've been talking about.
How does a kingpin in Baghdad recruit a 12-year-old in Melbourne?
Or in Arizona.
Yeah.
They aren't meeting on a street corner, they are weaponizing video games. The source points out that major organizations, like the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, have dedicated recruiters.
Logging into public lobbies.
Yes, on games like Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto V, Call of Duty, at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Let's analyze the architecture of that environment for a second. A public lobby in GTA Online is a shared virtual space, right? Open microphone communication, pseudo-anonymity, and a core gameplay loop built entirely around acquiring status through hyperviolence and drug running. Now, consider the selection bias. What kind of 13-year-old is awake and playing in a public voice lobby at 3 in the morning?
A kid who is isolated, bored, lacking parental supervision.
Exactly. Existing in a fractured home environment, they are sitting alone in the void.
And the cartel recruiters know exactly how to play them. The source breaks down this psychological love-bombing tactic they use.
How does it work?
Well, a recruiter enters the game using a high-status avatar, maybe sporting cartel acronyms in their username, and they don't immediately ask the kid to commit a crime.
That would scare them off.
Right. They start by praising them. They tell the kid, hey, you're a great shot. You have good tactical sense. Then they invite them to a private Discord server.
So suddenly, this isolated kid has a crew.
Exactly. He has older guys who respect him. And then the recruiter just maps the real-world crime onto the video game mechanics.
Gamification.
Completely. They'll say, hey, you're great at being a lookout in the game. I'll pay you $200 a week to just stand on a real street corner and text me if you see a cop.
It is the literal gamification of reality. And to a kid with no money, no respect, and no prospects, $200 is life-altering.
And the psychological initiation is intoxicating for them.
But the escalation is just rapid and brutal. The source cites a case in Oaxaca, Mexico. 3 boys, all between 11 and 14, were recruited through a mobile battle royale game called Garena Free Fire.
Just a game on their phones?
Right. The recruiter groomed them, actually purchased bus tickets for them, and directed them to travel to northern Mexico to work actively for the cartel.
To actually move product or do violence.
Yes. They were intercepted, thankfully, but it proves how seamlessly the digital groomer can manifest physical action.
And we saw it in the U.S., too. The source mentioned the young woman in Arizona. She thought she was taking an innocuous gig to transport electronics for a guy she met on GTA Online.
And what happened?
She was caught at the border with 60 kilograms of methamphetamine in her car.
Unbelievable.
Her entire reality had been rewritten by a digital relationship. And law enforcement is basically playing catch-up against a ghost.
Well, the syndicates are so sophisticated now, they stopped using commercial apps and started engineering their own bespoke encrypted networks.
Like EncroChat.
EncroChat, Sky ECC. They essentially built a dark web telecommunications infrastructure just for organized crime.
Though we really have to highlight the sheer ingenuity of the law enforcement response in one specific case from the source. Operation Trojan Shield.
Oh, this is brilliant.
It's like something out of a movie. When the FBI realized they couldn't crack these bespoke networks, they didn't just try to hack them, they built their own.
The ANOM app.
Yes. The FBI secretly created this supposedly impenetrable encrypted app called ANOM. They seeded it into the criminal underworld through informants, marketed it as the ultimate secure platform, and convinced 12,000 criminals across 100 countries to use it.
They essentially paid a subscription fee to hand their operational playbooks directly to federal agents.
Literally.
Yeah.
The FBI just sat back, read the messages in real time, and executed a coordinated takedown of over 800 people.
It's a stunning tactical victory, but, stepping back from the cops and robbers thrill of it, the underlying sociological truth here is profoundly depressing.
Oh, absolutely. I cannot shake the dark irony of this entire situation. Think about it. We established earlier that the modern university system won't spend a fraction of a percent of its budget to give a graduating senior a human mentor.
Right.
Yet a drug cartel operating on a random Fortnite server will actively seek out a 13-year-old, learn his name, praise his skills, give him a structured path for advancement, and offer him direct, upward financial mobility.
It's sickening.
The cartel is functioning as a more effective institutional mentor than the society that supposedly protects the child.
Because the cartel recognizes human nature. Humans require initiation. Young men, in particular, require a structured hierarchy, a test of competence, and a tribe that acknowledges their value.
Right.
When legitimate institutions abandon those mechanisms, when they replace human initiation with AI algorithms and isolating individualism, the demand for that structure doesn't just disappear.
It just finds a new supplier.
Exactly. The cartel provides a deeply warped, destructive version of brotherhood. But to a starving person, even poison looks like food.
That is the perfect pivot because, thankfully, not everyone starving in this void turns to the criminal underworld.
Right. There's another reaction happening.
Yeah. The instinct to seek out a harsh, rigorous initiation doesn't always lead to violence. For a growing cohort of people, the reaction to the modern void is an absolute, radical rejection of the modern world entirely.
Seeking out tradition.
Exactly. They're seeking out the most ancient, demanding spiritual frameworks they can find. And that brings us to the deep dive into spiritual authenticity and the Punk-to-Pilgrim pipeline from the Father Tryphon and Paul Vanderklay sources.
It's such a fascinating countercultural movement when the mainstream culture is defined by fluidity, digital aesthetics, and the erasure of boundaries we discussed earlier.
Before consensus stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ultimate form of rebellion against that is to seek out rigid boundaries, deep historical roots, and absolute demanding truth.
Father Tryphon shares this incredible anecdote about a young man named Anthony. Anthony was deeply embedded in the punk rock scene, touring the country, living that chaotic, anti-establishment lifestyle.
But the nihilism of it eventually broke him.
Completely broke him. So he ends up visiting an Orthodox Christian monastery. And what he finds there isn't just a different flavor of religion. He finds a completely different operational frequency.
A slower pace.
Yes. He finds a slow, deliberate pace, overwhelming physical beauty in the liturgy, and an environment totally stripped of worldly digital distractions.
And the psychological through line from punk rock to monasticism seems contradictory at first.
Right. How do you go from mosh pits to incense?
But until you look at the mechanism of both, they are both extreme rejections of the bourgeois consumerist middle-class norm.
The source highlighted Justin Marler, right?
Yes, Justin Marler. He was a founding member of the legendary doom metal band, Sleep.
Huge band in that scene.
Massive. And he literally walked away from the music industry at the height of his career to spend 7 years as an Orthodox monk on Mount Sinai and in Alaska.
That is wild.
When you are disgusted by the superficiality of the modern world, taking a vow of poverty, obedience, and chastity is just about the most hardcore punk rock thing you can possibly do. It is a demand for a reality that bleeds.
I love that phrase, a reality that bleeds. But this is where the sources get incredibly sharp. Even this desperate search for ancient authenticity is being hijacked by the digital frontier.
The internet ruins everything.
Pretty much. 'Cause you can't just have a quiet, organic, spiritual movement anymore. The internet has to commodify it. Paul Vanderklay's source material digs into what he calls the Orthodox moment, currently blowing up on YouTube and TikTok.
Where ancient mystical traditions are essentially being repackaged and optimized for algorithms.
Exactly. Which brings us to this brilliant scathing critique by an Orthodox cleric, Father Emanuel Lemelson. He completely deconstructs the theater of this digital religion.
He zeroes in on a specific cultural moment, right?
Yeah. He critiques this moment when a prominent Orthodox priest, Josiah Trenum, appeared on the hypermodern Girls Gone Bible podcast. And Lemelson doesn't just critique the theology, He critiques the medium itself.
He uses the term Orientalism.
Right, let's unpack that because it's vital. He's saying that these online influencers adopt the intense aesthetic of the ancient world. They wear the flowing black cassocks, the massive pectoral crosses, they grow the enormous beards.
Sometimes they even affect slightly exotic accents.
Exactly, all to project this aura of ancient authority. But they are essentially harvesting the prestige of an ancestral lineage just for algorithmic clout.
They want the aesthetic of the old world.
Yes, but they deliberately sever ties with the actual localized, messy, ethnic church communities that actually kept those symbols alive through centuries of persecution.
It's purely optical.
It makes me think of the way corporations sell rebellion. Is downloading an ancient faith from a YouTube playlist any different than buying a pre-faded, artificially distressed vintage rock t-shirt at a high-end mall?
That's a great analogy.
You get the aesthetic of the rebellion. You get to project the image to your friends, but you never actually live the history. You didn't put in the grueling, boring, everyday work of maintaining the tradition.
And that is exactly the friction Lemelson is highlighting. Marshall McLuhan's adage applies here perfectly. The medium is the message.
The medium is the message.
Right. When you take a religion that is inherently physical, based on consuming the Eucharist, smelling incense, physically bowing, submitting to a local bishop, and you flatten it into a 1080p video thumbnail designed to trigger engagement in a comment section, you fundamentally mutate the religion.
It ceases to be an organic community you submit to and becomes a lifestyle brand you consume.
The algorithm just turns the priest into a content creator.
Which naturally leads to the question, if it's all content, what happens when the creators start collaborating and competing?
Blood sports.
Exactly. This brings us to the Sacred Differences source and the realization that underneath the digital posturing, there are massive, irreconcilable theological fault lines that are turning the internet into an absolute religious war zone.
Because if a listener thinks these online debates are just squabbles over who has the better liturgy, the Sacred Differences source shatters that illusion.
Totally shatters it.
They meticulously break down the profound foundational differences between the Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox views of God. The divide isn't about style. It's about the very nature of existence, salvation, and whether God himself is capable of suffering.
Let's dive deep into these three frameworks, because understanding this explains the ferocity of the debates online. Let's start with the Catholic view as presented by the source.
The mechanism here is deeply rooted in medieval legal frameworks. The source explains that Catholic theology views God as absolute justice and fundamentally impassible.
Impassible, meaning what?
Meaning God's divine nature cannot suffer, change, or be emotionally moved by the created world. They rely heavily on Anselm's satisfaction theory.
Okay, break down Anselm for us.
To understand Anselm, you have to understand the feudal concept of honor. In this framework, human sin isn't just a mistake. It is an infinite offense against the infinite honor of God.
Okay.
An infinite offense requires an infinite payment or satisfaction. Since a finite human cannot pay an infinite debt, humanity is in severe legal jeopardy.
So how is it resolved?
Therefore, Christ, being both God and man, makes the infinite payment on the cross. In this model, the institutional church acts as the divine treasury, dispensing the grace necessary to resolve the individual's legal debt through the sacraments.
Okay, so that's a heavily institutional legal model. You bank on the church's treasury. Then the source contrasts this with the Protestant view, specifically the Reformed or Calvinist stream that dominates American evangelicalism.
Right. The Protestant reformers look at Anselm's satisfaction and replace it with something much more severe: penal substitution.
Penal substitution. The courtroom dynamic gets intensified.
Very much so. God the Father doesn't just receive payment. He literally pours out his judicial divine wrath directly onto God the Son on the cross.
And the view of humanity is different here too, right?
The anthropology is radically different. The source notes the Reformed doctrine of total depravity. Humans aren't just in legal debt. Their wills are entirely broken. They are incapable of choosing God.
So what happens?
Therefore, God must practice unconditional election, unilaterally choosing whom to save. And crucially, when a person is saved, the grace and justification are imputed directly to the individual believer,
Bypassing the church.
entirely bypassing the need for a sacramental institutional church. It is a direct vertical legal transaction.
So the Catholic is banking on the church's treasury, and the Protestant is relying on a direct legal pardon in the divine courtroom.
Exactly.
And then you have the Orthodox view, which look at both of these Western legal frameworks and completely rejects them.
Yes. The source explains that the Orthodox absolutely reject the Greek philosophical constraint of divine impassibility. They argue that if God is love, God must be capable of genuine suffering.
And they explain this through a 14th century monk, right, Gregory Palamas.
Palamas is the key to the entire Eastern framework. He established the vital distinction between God's unknowable essence and his interacting energies.
Essence and energies.
Right. You can never know God's essence, what he actually is in his core, but you can directly experience and participate in his uncreated energies. Think of the essence as the sun itself, and the energies as the sunlight and heat that actually touch your skin.
I want to make sure I grasp the profound difference here. If I'm a Reformed Protestant, salvation is a judge banging a gavel and declaring my legal record clean because someone else took the punishment.
Correct.
But the source says that for the Orthodox, salvation isn't the legal pardon at all. It's theosis.
Theosis.
Yes.
Yes. It is ontological healing. It is divinization. The Orthodox view is that humanity is sick, not just legally guilty.
Sick needing a hospital, not a courtroom.
Exactly. Salvation is the process of being grafted into God's energies, literally participating in the divine nature to heal your broken humanity.
And because the energies are how God interacts with the world, the Orthodox insist that when Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, it wasn't just his human nature crying while his divine nature remained detached.
Right. God's uncreated energies were genuinely suffering with his creation.
And this isn't just abstract philosophy. The Van der Klee source traces how this exact theology of experiencing God's energies drove the monks on Mount Athos in the 14th century.
The hesychasts.
Yes, hesychasm. They would sit in dark cells on low stools, physically regulate their breathing to match their heartbeat, and endlessly repeat the Jesus prayer.
Their goal was deeply physical and mystical.
Totally. To take the spiritual intellect out of the anxious, chattering brain and physically unite it with the heart.
And the Western scholars of the time found this absolutely ridiculous.
They mocked them.
They did. The source notes that Western critics called the Athonite monks omphalosychoi, which translates to navel gazers, because they sat hunched over with their chins resting on their chests.
The West wanted rational, scholastic debate. The East was practicing intense physiological mysticism.
But here is where this deep theology violently collides with world history.
Oh, the Mehmed story. This blew my mind.
The source points out that this seemingly obscure debate over essence and energies had massive geopolitical consequences. Fast forward 100 years to 1453.
The fall of Constantinople.
Right. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, has just conquered the city. The Byzantine Empire has fallen. Mehmed now rules millions of Orthodox Christians.
And his biggest fear is a united Christian front.
Exactly. His greatest fear is that these Eastern Christians will unite with the Catholic West to launch a massive crusade to take the city back.
So what does Mehmed do? He plays theologian.
It's brilliant strategy. He acutely understands the theological friction between the hesychast East and the scholastic West. So Mehmed intentionally appoints a fiercely anti-unionist monk named Gennadios Scholarios as the new Patriarch of Constantinople.
He empowers the exact faction within Orthodoxy that is most dogmatically opposed to Rome's legal theology.
Yes. By doing so, he weaponizes the essence-energies distinction to ensure that the Christian East and West remain fundamentally fractured. He neutralized the threat of a united Christian military front against the Ottoman Empire.
He literally used mysticism as a geopolitical firewall.
It is an incredible piece of history.
But let's bring those same rhetorical weapons back to the modern digital frontier.
Yeah.
Because today, those fault lines aren't deciding the fate of empires. They are driving what the sources call gunboat apologetics.
Or internet blood sports.
Right. And we have to tread carefully here and simply present the sociological phenomenon the sources describe. The Van der Klee source looks at how prominent thinkers like Jonathan Pigou frame the modern religious landscape.
Pigou argues a highly specific, provocative framework.
He asserts that for historic Christianity, Islam and Judaism act as antichrists in geometrically opposite, mirroring ways.
Right. He frames Islam as an external, physical, conquering force that seeks to swallow and subsume Christian civilization from the outside.
And conversely, he frames Judaism as an internal subverting influence, a familial root that rejects the Christ branch and seeks to individualize the culture from within.
And when you drop highly combustible frameworks like that onto platforms optimized for conflict, you get digital warfare.
The sources detail how Protestant apologetics channels groups with names like the Apologetics Roadshow and God Logic have essentially formed a digital armada.
They organize these massive, highly coordinated, incredibly hostile public debates with prominent Muslim debaters like Muhammad Hijab.
It's just hours of screaming, logic traps, and theological combat.
But the battlefield is a total free-for-all. Because while the Protestants are attacking the Muslims, Orthodox creators, like Jay Dyer, enter the fray from the flank and turn their rhetorical guns on the Protestants.
Right, Dyer heavily critiques these Protestant apologists, accusing them of practicing what he calls Islaminity.
Islaminity.
Yes. His argument is that these modern Protestants possess such a shallow historical theology and lack any real understanding of the Incarnation or a historic church that they end up creating a bastardized religion.
They unite solely around a shared hatred of Islam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Adopting Islamic-style iconoclasm and legalism without realizing they have abandoned historical Christianity in the process.
I sit back and look at this ecosystem and I'm just stunned by the sheer dissonance of it all.
Jarring.
We have taken the most profound, terrifying mysteries of the human soul, the very nature of the divine, the ontological healing of humanity, centuries of silent, breathing prayer in dark caves, and we have turned them into a WWE SmackDown optimized for YouTube monetization.
It is the absolute degradation of faith into digital content. I mean, think about it. If you spend your time consuming theological blood sports, are you actually participating in the divine energies, or are you just feeding the algorithm your own outrage?
That realization that the digital void is fundamentally vampiric, draining your energy while offering only the illusion of substance, is causing a massive burnout.
People are just exhausted by it.
They are. And this leads us to the most hopeful theme across today's sources, the desperate, necessary return to physical reality and objective beauty.
Yes. If the digital matrix is toxic, the only escape hatch is the physical world. And the brutal American podcast source dives deep into the mechanics of this escape.
They focus on the absolute necessity of building genuine physical brotherhoods.
And their core argument is a direct challenge to the modern male. You cannot build a brotherhood in a Discord server or a YouTube comment section. Real connection requires the friction of the physical world. It requires physical standards.
They advocate for shared suffering as the essential raw material for genuine trust.
The source details a very specific, brutal fitness test they used to forge this. The farmers carry, but loaded to exactly a man's body weight.
This isn't a casual gym workout.
No. Let's visualize the mechanism of that. Imagine stepping up to 2 heavy iron implements. You have to physically load them with plates until they equal your exact body weight. Just picking that up is hard enough. Right, but then you have to pick them up and carry them for distance until your grip fails, your lungs burn, and your nervous system just screams at you to drop them.
The philosophy there is profound, though.
It is. They argue that modern men are trapped in cubicles, staring at screens, managing data. We've become entirely detached from the physical reality of our own bodies.
Carrying that weight builds thick skin.
Yes. It forces men back into a hierarchical, agonistic culture where your value isn't based on your digital avatar's stats, but on your literal physical capacity to carry a burden alongside other men.
It's an initiation ritual, plain and simple. It reestablishes the historical baseline expectation that a man should be physically capable and resilient in the real world.
But this return to physical reality isn't just about sweat and iron. The sources from Memoria Press and Master Samwise argue that this return must also encompass aesthetics. Yes. If we are starved for physical reality, we are equally starved for physical beauty.
The Memoria Press source draws this razor-sharp contrast between modern realism and classical idealism.
Walk us through that.
They argue that modern art and modern architecture, think of brutalist concrete buildings or hyper-realistic, cynical cinema, view humanity as inherently wretched or purely utilitarian.
Just meat and concrete.
Exactly. But classical idealism views the human form as emblematic of an inner transcendent beauty.
They point to the great achievements of the past, the winged victory of Samothrace, the breathtaking variations of the statue of David sculpted by Michelangelo, Donatello, Bernini.
The mechanism of these works isn't just to look pretty. The source argues a deep philosophical point. While truth and goodness are the structural virtues of a society, it is beauty that actually awakens human desire.
Beauty's the hook.
Exactly. If you surround yourself with an ugly, utilitarian digital environment, a world of gray interfaces and cynical memes, you systematically starve the part of your soul that longs for the good.
And Master Samwise takes this high-minded, philosophical critique of modernity and finds it perfectly articulated in, of all places, a video game.
Red Dead Redemption 2.
Red Dead 2. He analyzes the game's juxtaposition of the dying, gritty Old West with the creeping, industrialized modern city. He shares this quote from the gang leader, Dutch van der Linde.
What's the quote?
Dutch looks at the incoming industrial civilization and says it is just man so in love with greed he has forgotten himself and found only appetites.
Wow. It is a brilliant distillation of the problem.
It really is. The game doesn't romanticize the past. It acknowledges that human evil, violence, and greed persist across all eras. But Dutch's quote pinpoints the specific, unique decay of the modern era.
When a society abandons its historical roots, its physical communities, and its pursuit of transcendent beauty,
Right.
but is left only appetite.
The pursuit of wealth and sensory input replaces any grounded sense of self.
It perfectly ties our themes together. It's the stark difference between grinding for digital honor points in a game or screaming for likes in a YouTube debate versus literally picking up your own body weight in a farmer's carry or standing silently in front of a Michelangelo sculpture.
One path builds a digital avatar that vanishes when the server shuts down. The other path builds a grounded human being.
But we have to acknowledge that escaping into fitness or art doesn't shield you from the macro-level consequences of this institutional collapse.
Unfortunately, no.
The tension between the physical reality we live in and the narratives we are fed by the void inevitably bleeds into politics. And that is the final area our sources examine today.
We are looking at a fractured political landscape where the rules seem entirely broken. And again, we are acting as impartial guides through the source material here.
Right.
The Annex R source returns with a highly controversial argument regarding the justice system. They claim that the cultural shifts we outlined earlier in the post-war consensus, specifically the mechanism of white guilt, have resulted in a blatant two-tiered justice system.
A system that punishes political incorrectness more severely than actual violence.
Right. To support this framework, the source contrasts specific legal outcomes. They cite the case of a couple in Georgia who received 15 to 20 years in prison for brandishing Confederate flags, yelling racial slurs, and threatening violence at a party.
And then they juxtapose this with cases where individuals committed actual physical kidnapping and torture, but only received sentences of 4 to 8 years.
The source uses this disparity to argue that the institutional system is no longer dispensing blind justice based on physical harm.
It's acting as an ideological enforcer.
Handing down draconian sentences for cultural thought crimes while being lenient on physical depravity.
The source also points to a recent 60-minute segment focused on a group called the Active Club.
Right. The source argues that this group, which they describe as a pro-white organization participating in community disaster relief, is unfairly demonized by the media and federal agencies as a paramount domestic threat.
And they contrast this treatment with the media's celebration of other ethnic advocacy groups like the NAACP or Black Lives Matter, who are praised for organizing explicitly around their own racial and ethnic interests.
The source frames this as an unsustainable double standard.
And this friction over identity politics ties into a broader geopolitical discussion on assimilation versus isolation, which the source featuring Kang Min Lee explores.
Yes, speaking from a South Korean perspective, the source offers a stark warning about the realities of mass immigration in the West.
He argues that importing massive populations without demanding integration inevitably results in isolated, competing ethnic enclaves.
He posits that historically, true assimilation doesn't happen through government mandates. It happens organically through intermarriage and the slow generational integration of diverse people into a single, cohesive national identity.
Without that, you just have tribal warfare within a shared border.
And while the right is wrestling with these intense questions of identity, tribalism, and unequal justice, the political center is experiencing its own existential panic.
The Richard IV source details the infighting within the UK establishment.
Right. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has recently come out attacking current Labour leaders Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham. Blair is frantically pushing for a return to what he calls a radical center.
Blair's panic is very revealing. The establishment center sees the rise of populist movements like the Reform Party in the UK, which is making massive inroads in traditional Labour heartlands.
Because the working class is actively rejecting the neoliberal globalist economics of the post-war consensus. It hollowed out their towns and shipped their jobs away.
Exactly. So Blair's trying to figure out how the establishment can co-opt this populist energy, how to be radical enough to appease the anger while remaining center enough to protect the globalist economic machine.
It is a landscape of absolute chaos. You have institutional failure, digital cartels recruiting kids on Fortnite, religious blood sports on YouTube, and a panicking political class trying to hold on to power.
It feels apocalyptic.
It really does. But the Livingstone source offers a deeply sobering, long-term, historical perspective that undercuts all of our modern anxiety.
They contrast our current moment with the ancient Roman Empire.
They discuss the Roman spirit of domination, an empire that enforced its will with brutal mechanical efficiency, crushing rebellions and managing the known world.
And yet, the source notes that our modern society, despite our immense technology, is gripped by constant, low-level apocalyptic anxiety.
We panic over fluctuating gas prices,
Oh, yeah.
supply chain hiccups, election cycles. We act as if every disruption is the end of the world.
But who actually survived Rome?
Exactly. The source reminds us that history is rarely shaped in the long run by the screaming revolutionaries, the panicked politicians, or the dominant empires.
The people who ultimately shaped the future of Western civilization were the quiet, faithful Christians operating entirely under the radar.
They didn't seek political domination. They just lived in physical harmony, shared their resources, cared for the sick during plagues, and maintained their ancient, unyielding theology.
They outlasted the empire simply by being profoundly grounded in reality.
It is the ultimate antidote to the void. The empire falls, the institutions collapse, the digital algorithms scream for your attention, but the quiet, physical reality of faithful human connection endures.
It's the only thing that does.
Which brings us to the actionable steps for today's deep dive. We've covered massive, heavy concepts, but the response has to be intensely personal. You brought us these sources because you sense this institutional decay. Here's how you respond. Step 1. Audit your digital diet immediately.
Crucial.
Are you outsourcing your worldview to algorithms? Are you feeding your energy into online gunboats and theological theater? Stop. The algorithm doesn't care about your soul. It cares about your watch time. Engage with physical ideas, not digital avatars.
Step 2. Build physical networks. Do not wait for your university to hand you a career, or your government to hand you a community, or a digital influencer to hand you an identity.
Take responsibility for your physical reality. Go to the gym, load up a farmer's carry with your friends, and build thick skin. Build a community rooted in shared physical effort, not just shared digital grievances.
And step 3. Seek absolute beauty and deep history. Break the recency bias of the internet. Go read a book written before 1900. Dig into the ancient historical roots of your own beliefs.
Whether they are theological, political, or cultural. Do the grueling work of understanding the essence of things rather than just consuming the fast food digital aesthetic of them.
We highly encourage you to check out the original sources we referenced today. The topics of hesychasm, the mechanics of encrypted cartel networks, the deep history of the post-war consensus. These require dozens of hours of study to fully grasp. The links are right there for you to explore.
Please do, and let us know in the comments where you are encountering these themes of institutional failure and the digital void in your own life and how you're responding to it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the show. The diagnostic waters of our modern culture are incredibly muddy, and the digital frontier is wild. But you don't have to drown in the void. You can choose to step back into reality. I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today as you disconnect. If algorithms can hijack our deepest spiritual longings, and video games can map out recruitment pipelines for our children into international crime syndicates, are we still the conscious architects of our own civilization, or have we willingly become the passive consumers of our own decay?